of the things that's going to be surprising is the extent to which they're infighting. The infighting within the police, the infighting between the city officials or the elected officials, the fighting between the police, infighting between the level of dysfunction, I think, that's going to get revealed here is going to cause people to question the competency of some of our government agencies.
What happened today? First of all, tell us who's presiding. What's the room like? How many people are in there? How many lawyers? Where were you? Before we get into the substance, tell us, what was it like?
Well, it was, there was a tension in the room for sure. I think everybody in that room understands the gravity of what's happening here. This is a historic legal and political event of our lifetime. Justice Rouleau, he's a sitting justice of the Ontario Court of Appeal. He was appointed by the Prime Minister and the Privy Council to be the commissioner in this matter. He kind of laid down the ground rules and allowed the various parties to, the who's who in the zoo. To give you a sense of scale, when we had an all-council call last week,
all lawyers.
All lawyers, yep. Thank you. All lawyers were on this call that are involved, and there were 78 lawyers on that call. Lawyers. When I look at how the deck's stacked, we calculate that there's approximately 50 lawyers against us. So, but we're ready for it. We've got a phenomenal team. There's 4 of us. And so Justice Rouleau's task is to receive the evidence from a wide variety of parties and documents and oral evidence and cross-examination to determine whether or not the invocation was justified.
Now, you say 50 lawyers are against us. I'm assuming that means they're lawyers for the state, they're lawyers for Trudeau, they're lawyers for the city of Ottawa and the police. So on the other side, you mentioned there's 4 of you. You're referring to your legal team.
Yeah.
Is that, and are you affiliated with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom?
That's right. So the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom's a legal charity, has been helping cover a large portion of the legal costs of the legal team, and very important work, and they could use more help at all times. The Justice Center itself is also participating, dealing more at a policy level and a charter and rights and freedoms alongside of the Democracy Fund.
Alan Honor, the lawyer for the Democracy Fund, was there today, and he made some remarks. So are there any other good guys there? Democracy Fund and JCCF, who else is there?
Well, there's another group that's representing the protesters at Windsor. There's some academics that are very concerned about the Constitution, Ryan Alford.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that. I'm shocked to hear that. I didn't know any academics cared about freedom anymore.
Yeah, I hear you. But no, he's been very engaged. There's going to be some really complex issues where they've already signaled the federal government that they're going to want to go in camera.
That means turn off it actually means turn off the camera, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It means it's a secret hearing that no transcripts, no videos will be allowed. Like I said, how do you have a public hearing that's a secret hearing?
Well, absolutely. And what are they going to talk about? CISA's assessment of the puncturability of jumpy castles? Yeah. I mean, come on. So anyway, it's going to be interesting, but the cross-examination start tomorrow. And if things go as we expect, there'll be some very interesting developments tomorrow.
I want to bring Sheila Gunn-Reid in just 1 minute, but I want to ask you to clarify that last thing you said, cross-examination. So typically a witness says something, and then they're asked tough questions based on their testimony. Do we have a list of witnesses? Do we know the order of witnesses? Do we know the name of all the witnesses? Who's up tomorrow?
Okay. So let me first zoom out a little bit. The list is long. There's a publicly released list that has 65 approximately witnesses on it. Okay. The Prime Minister's on that list. The commissioner for the RCMP, Brenda Lucky's on that list. Mendocino's on that list. Blair's on that list. 1/5 of the cabinet.
Christian Freeland,
all of these people. The head of the OPP, the mayor of Ottawa, and so on, the various police chiefs.
Including the police chief who it looks like he was fired for not being tough enough.
Yeah, solely.
I'll be interested to hear from him if he's allowed to speak.
Right. And so and it's a living document. It's not a final list. Mm-hmm. We've submitted a list of 25 witnesses that we'd like to see, including Dean French, the former chief of staff to Premier Doug Ford, who helped negotiate the deal with the mayor just before the invocation of the Emergencies Act, former Premier Peckford, a number of Danny Bulford, and so on, a number of important people involved in the freedom movement. We think they should testify. So we're still working that through. And what's going to happen is you're going to see each day the witness list is going to get filled out a little bit more for the coming days. So right now we know the witnesses for tomorrow and we know the witnesses for Monday.
And who are they?
So tomorrow we're actually going to have Lexi Lee, who is the plaintiff with Paul Champ, the personal injury lawyer that brought the $300 million class action lawsuit.
Because horn honking is so, she's disturbed for life. She had to hear some horns honk.
A ridiculous claim.
Very troubling.
But, it's a big deal. Tom Marazzo is one of the persons listed. Tamara Lich, Chris Barber, and others have been listed in this class action. No one wants to get sued for $300 million. So this is a serious matter. So she's going to testify. Interestingly, Miss Dean, who was on the police board chair, I believe is going to be up tomorrow if we get through the schedule, as well as some other local officials and residents. Interesting, next week, we're going to have Steve Kanalakis, who is the city manager. I was involved in direct negotiations with him, as was Tom Marazzo, with respect to the deal and other matters. So it's going to be interesting to see how his testimony unfolds. And we have documents to make sure he stays in his lane.
Well, that sounds very exciting. We're going to talk to Alan Hunter a little bit later. He is your counterpart at the Democracy Fund, and I know he made some remarks today to the commission, very exciting. But I want to invite our dear friend Sheila Gunn-Reid, our chief reporter, and who has been live tweeting all day. Sheila, I'd like you to weigh in either with questions for Keith, or you said you saw some tantalizing things in the opening briefings from this commission that you say were curious and that maybe were ignored by the mainstream media. So what are the things, because you were covering this thing all day, tell us something that our viewers wouldn't know, or put a question to Keith Wilson. Love to get you involved in the conversation.
Sure. What I found most curious, Keith, and I don't know how much of it that you saw or stuck around to watch, the explanation from the government for why they used Section 58. Now, Section 58 is the justification for invoking the Emergencies Act. It's like a restraining order against the government, really. And it says that to declare a public order emergency, there has to be an emergency arising from threats to the security of Canada that are so serious as to be a national emergency. Apparently, bouncy castles, hot tubs, and honking does that. Threats to the security of Canada, including threats or acts of serious violence against persons or property to achieve political or ideological objectives. There was no real violence against the truckers. There was violence committed against truckers. And a national emergency so emergent that the local police forces do not have the tools to deal with the emergency. And Keith, your client is charged with mischief, being annoying in a public place, really. So I guess my question to you is, well, and I guess because you're there on the other side of this, prediction-wise, are they even going to be remotely successful in proving that the police did not have the tools they needed to address bouncy castles, hot tubs, and open-air soup kitchens?
Well, I don't think so. And one of the things that's going to be surprising is the extent to which they're infighting. The infighting within the police, the infighting between the city officials or the elected officials, the fighting between the police, infighting between the level of dysfunction, I think, that's going to get revealed here is going to cause people to question the competency of some of our government agencies. In the opening statement for our group, and lawyer Brendan Miller is our lead counsel in the barrister's role. So you may have saw, Sheila, his opening statement where he basically put the pop cans on the fence posts and knocked each one of them off and said, there's 5 things you have to prove, and there will be no evidence to support any one of the 5. So this is going to be, I knew it was going to be interesting, and I think it's actually going to be riveting.
I do too. And, just again, from the government's explanation here. They're already starting to use social justice nonsense to change the meaning of words. Under continuing blockades and activities tied to serious acts of violence, they say these activities are tied to serious acts of violence. Slow rolls, slowing down traffic, creating traffic jams, and tow truck drivers refusing to work with governments to remove vehicles from blockades. According to the government, those are activities that are tied to or result in serious acts of violence. It's outrageous that they think that they can get away with this.
Keith, I know you just lost your phone for a second there. Sheila was saying that the stretching of those words to include slow rolling trucks as an act of violence is absurd, and it marks a lurch from real law to touchy-feely woke politics.
Well, what Professor Alfred said in his statement today is that that's not the test. The test isn't whether something's associated or close to or related to or nearby. It has to be actual evidence of it, actual evidence of violence towards the state, actual evidence of each one of those criteria, or any combination of them. So that's the jockeying for positioning is occurring. I don't envy the federal government lawyers' position. They're in a tough spot.
Mm-hmm. I got one more question for you, Keith, and then we're going to have another short commercial break, and we're going to call on your colleague at the Democracy Fund, Alan Honor. Tamara Lich has become a tremendous symbol of this movement, peaceful, patriotic, positive, and yet, the vendetta against her, not just by Trudeau and the police, but by the prosecutor. And I've never heard in my entire life anywhere in Canada, let alone in any other Commonwealth country, of someone being jailed even for a day for a mischief charge. Actually, that's not true. One guy who blew up the power grid in Quebec,
yes,
got a little bit of jail time. But I've never heard of a pre-trial custody of 49 days for someone who has no violence, no threat to the community. I've just never seen such a thing. Tell me a little bit, without giving away any confidences, what do you expect Tamara Lich to say as a witness, and what do you think the impact will be of what she has to say on this inquiry? And finally, these are a lot of questions. What's she going to say? What's the impact going to be on the inquiry? And what are the bad guys going to try to do to her in cross-examination?
Well, let me try and tackle those. I'd first say that she's going to tell the truth. And the impact is going to be to confirm that this was an extreme example of the federal government and Prime Minister Trudeau overreaching and using this nuclear weapon of statutory powers against Canadian citizens. I'm not going to go into cross-examination, but I'm going to say this, Ezra, because it's really important. It goes to an underlying theme in your question. Today, Tamara was mobbed by the legacy media. And they all said, Tamara, they're asking her for comment on this, comment on that, comment on this. And she just smiled and declined to comment. So when I was scrummed, they're like, well, why won't Tamara talk to us? And I thought to myself, are you guys kidding me? Are you not paying attention here? So I explained to them that under these draconian bail conditions, she's not allowed to criticize the federal government's COVID mandates, and she's not allowed to speak in support of the convoy, the Freedom Convoy. And I pointed out to them that right now in Putin's Russia, they could interview Valani, his critic, but in Trudeau's Canada, Tamara Lich can't speak.
Incredible. Well, it'll be interesting because, of course, my understanding is if you speak before a judicial commission, it's like being in a court and you have absolute privilege, immunity to answer truthfully before a judge. Now, that's my understanding.
Yeah, let me
correct me if I'm
nail
wrong.
that for you. That's what I explained to the reporters as well. The gaggle of the legacy media was that they need to understand that the way this works is because it's a public inquiry, and these are pretty rare. that under the rules and the law that applies, it means that when Tamara is subpoenaed, and as with Tom Marazzo and Chris Barber and others, when they're speaking under oath in the commission, they have protections under the Charter and the Canada Evidence Act, which means nothing they say can be used against them in other proceedings. So the only place she can speak right now, because of these bizarre punitive and politically motivated, in my view, bail conditions, is in that room. So I think it was an eye opener for the reporters, because they really wanted to ask her questions, and then it suddenly realized, wow, so she goes back to jail if she talks to us here? And the answer is yeah.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see.
But wouldn't they love that?
Yeah,
but wouldn't they love that?
Isn't that the truth? Sheila's saying they would love that. Some of them would. Some of the reporters would love it if she was back in jail. Some of the more partisan reporters. Others, the fact that they don't know that this is the fact just is stunning to me.
Yes.
A Canadian citizen who's a public person has spent nearly 2 months in prison, and they don't know that. And they don't know about these bail conditions. They're not particularly troubled by it. And, oh, okay, that's interesting. That, to me, that's just as appalling. Well, Keith, it's great to see you. And I understand you're going to be here for the duration as well.
Yes.
Our Rebel News homemade studio. Today's day one. Thanks for helping us iron out the wrinkles in it. I think we're doing okay. And it's very important to me that this story of this commission of inquiry be told not just by the regime media, because as Sheila pointed out, and as the questions that put to you pointed out, if we relied on the regime media, we would not know what's really going on. In fact, if it were only up to the CBC, CTV, Global News, the truckers would have been called violent insurrectionists. Well, you saw Trudeau called them racist, misogynist, sedition. It was only because of citizen journalists that those lies were rebutted. So I think that having independent journalists here, and I heard that Western Standard has a reporter accredited. I hope True North does. Okay, that's good to hear. And we're going full tilt here. I really think we have a special duty, as our motto says, to tell the other side of the story. So thanks very much for coming in. I'm sure we'll talk to you in the weeks ahead.
Thanks for having me.
All right, there you have it, Keith Wilson, King's Counsel. I have to get used to saying that after so long of calling it QC, Queen's Counsel. If you don't know what that means, it means he's a top dog lawyer.
If you want to make sure to see everything that's happening and stay up to date with all of the action here, straight from downtown Ottawa, straight from Parliament, go check out truckercommission.com. Also, if you want to help us pay our expenses here, which includes an Airbnb, travel, food, and everything, you can also chip in at that same link.